Hey there everybody, it's Nathan Cool with nathancoolphoto.com, and this is part 3 of that artistic editing series. What we're going to do is we're going to finish up a lot of the special effects on this. It's a very simple process to do. If you recall, we started with something that was very simple. It was something straight out of camera that looked like this, shooting fitness model Kalik shields, and eventually this is going to turn it into something that looks like this. So in this tutorial, we're going to take it to the last step of the special effects where we add in all this lighting. So you're ready to get started and see how this is done? Let's take a look. Alright, so this is where we left off. Once again, just a recap real quick. We started out with something that looked like this, and it was a lot of it needed to be cropped out, reasons you'll see in the first part of this series, and then we went ahead and fixed it so that we had this extra area to it, and that gave us then a real high def picture without having to step too far back and crop it down. And then in the last video we added in these textures to add a lot of oomph to it. In this tutorial what we're going to do is add those special effect lighting effects to it. So it's what I like to call fog and rays, and this is something I've learned over the years. Different people have had different tutorials on this, and you might have seen how some of this is done. Very simple technique actually to make this finally have a real lot of pop to it. So first thing we want to do is to add a new layer at the very top. So at the very top here we're just going to go to layer and then new layer, and we'll call this layer spot. That's what I like to call it. We want to take a brush, and we want to make sure that that brush is very soft. We want to make sure that the flow and opacity are at 100%. We want to make the brush fairly small, like about that size would be good. And then we want to make sure that we're painting with white so that our color selector over here shows white. Now, just anywhere on here, go ahead and hit one dot. And there you got it. Now, using the soft brush, there's a soft edge around this. And so that's going to be used to our advantage next. So let's go ahead and zoom way out here. And what we want to do is now scale spot. So what we're going to do is go to Edit, Transform and Scale, and then we're going to transform him and scale him really big, because what we want is that little soft edge off him. Now, if we used a really big brush, we'd have a little soft edge, but not to the extent you can see what's happening here. So let's go ahead and put him there, and let's zoom back in here. You can see that now we've got this soft light that's going across him, and that was from no special blending mode except for just taking a brush and then with a very soft edge to it and then expanding it. Now we don't want that much in there, so we just drop the opacity of that down a little bit, and now we've got this light coming in. Now you can adjust the size of that for how much fall off you want. For instance, that doesn't have much fall off. If we wanted a lot more lighting fall off, you just scale that down and put that someplace else, like about here. Zoom back in to see where we are then after it scales that down, which takes a little while. This is a very big picture. And then we can maybe up that opacity a little bit. So depending on the effect that we want from it. So I'm going to go ahead and make that big though. So let's go ahead and scale that guy out. And now we've got that overlapping where the center of that, you can see where the center is. I'm just going to place that right in the corner and scale it out a little bit so we got some nice light going across. So it gives the idea of there's like maybe a street lamp there, or maybe this is backstage and there's a light that's above Kalik here. So we've kept that opacity down about 58. You can play around too with fill, and sometimes that gives you a little bit of a different effect because it'll fill in now to around our textures. So you can play around with it, see which one works for you. In fact, that fill then, if you recall from some of my real estate videos, that's what I like to actually use for the fireplace effects too, because it tends to fill in the color where it needs to. Anyway, splitting hairs on this to do that, but you can play around with that as much as you want. The next effect then that we want to put in there are rays of light that are coming in. So let's say this was good enough. You could stick with this, but that could be totally fine. You could also put spot a little bit lower below your textures, and you'll get a little bit more texture then from that texture that we added in. That might also work good. So you can play on where you might want to have that placed. Maybe I'd like to have it right there. So it's white light, but it's right underneath of where we put that background texture. So that's a little bit better. With that then, we might be able to then up the fill on that. So that looks good. So it's filling below, not so much above what we're doing. So anyways, those are different type of adjustments just for moving that layer around. But we want to, at this point though, probably go right up to the very top, and we can move this next layer around a little bit, and this is going to be our rays. So this one that I called spot, he's really our fog. When you get up here, we're going to do rays. So what we want to do is add a new fill layer. It's going to actually be a gradient. So let's go to a layer. And what we want is a new fill layer. And we want that to be a gradient. Now this gets a little bit tricky. What I'm going to do is I'm going to call this rays. There's a lot of steps involved with this. I'm going to go to soft light. Okay. Now we get the special tool. What I want to do first is make sure that this is an angled type of gradient. You can see what it does. It puts it into quadrants. What I want to do is make sure that that quadrant is going way up here. So the center of that, let's put it up just off of our corner right there. We can adjust that later. The next step is to click on where it says gradient. So you double click on that or click on it, bring it up. And what we want to do is check the gradient type to noise. Now, immediately there's all this color. We want to get rid of that. So the best way to do that is to go to where it says color model, change it instead of RGB to HSB, and then all you need to do is get rid of the saturation here on this slider with the S and move that all the way down. That gets rid of all that color. Now, it's a real dark looking rays, these gradients that are coming in here. So you can play around with this little button here called randomize. And as you start clicking that, then it changes those rays. You can change it to something that you like. And we'll just click around there, find something that we kind of like. That looks pretty good. You can also change the roughness of this. And to make it a little bit more of a widespread type of ray, you would lower that roughness. To make it tighter, you would raise it. So let's do something that's kind of in between at about 48. Okay? So that looks good. Let's zoom in here a little bit. We'll click OK. There. Now we can start adjusting these rays. Double click on that layer, and that'll bring up our gradient fill. And now we can start changing the angle. So I like to see, okay, what does 10 degrees look like? It defaults to 90 automatically. So we put in like 110, maybe about 160, whatever we feel we need. And it's like, if we feel that, that's good, but I want to be able to change some of that graininess. Let's go back and play around a little bit more with that randomness. Just once again, click on that little gradient thing up here and start randomizing a little bit. And change maybe your roughness up here. Change whatever you'd like. Maybe we'll do a little bit of a rougher ray. And that might look pretty good. And so you can play around with this as much as you want until you start getting the rays that you want to have coming off of that light. So maybe around 250 on that. Maybe that looks good. 240. Yeah, we'll go ahead and we'll keep it at that. Now, we can change this a little bit later if we need to. Any other adjustments need to be done at this point. So be sure that you're happy with it. And then we're going to take this layer, right click on it, and we're going to rasterize it. That allows us to do a lot more editing. Go over to the rays mask and invert it. Do a Control I. Now what you can do is take a brush, and we'll use a low flow. Let's change our flow on our brush to about 30%. Up here I used a keyboard shortcut. And then we'll start painting in some of those rays. Not all of them, just some of them. So we're going to control how much of those rays are coming in across Kalik from that light that we had in there. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I start liking that. So without the rays, this is what it looked like, and with the rays, this is what we have. If we want to add more rays to it, you can change the soft light to sometimes overlay. That makes it a little bit of a harder look to it. So you can play around with that as much as you'd like. So let's say that that looks good. Now the next thing is to add some punch to it. So now that we've got our fog and rays, let's add a levels layer. So let's go to a layer, adjustment layer, and we'll go to levels. And this is going to change levels all the way across. There's no clipping mask. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to brighten it a little bit by bringing up those whites. I'm going to add a little bit of contrast by bringing in those darks like that. That looks pretty good. I can maybe even up those whites a little bit more on some of this. And if it gets too bright in some areas, we've got a mask that we can erase some of that off. So let's say that I like it really bright like that coming across Kalik. I can just go down here to the layer mask and then erase some of it off. For instance, he had a lot of shine on his forehead, a little bit on his deltoids here, and maybe there's just a little too much up here where the light was first coming in. So that looks pretty good. We can also add different things like maybe a saturation layer, just to add a little bit more tone to the whole thing. Maybe up the saturation about maybe 10, 20, something like that. We'll go to 15, and that then adds a nice bit of saturation to it. So anyways, let's recap then where we were with everything. We started out with just this picture of Kalik straight out of camera. We cropped it, and that's why we've got this empty area here. So we used in our first video tutorial here in this series, we used the content aware scale, and we then finished that off. To make sure that it compensated and we had a little bit of punch, then we went ahead and added in these different textures. That was good. In this video then, we wanted to add some lighting effects. We wanted to add rays and fog. So we used just a simple spot, put him up there with just a simple brush tool, and then we used some rays using a gradient fill layer, and then we just added a couple adjustment layers, and now this is our final shot. Now there's a lot more we can do to this. When it comes to artistic portraits, you can do a lot of stuff. I can enhance some of the abs on Kalik. He's already got a good physique, so I don't really need to do that for this model. I could make some of the muscles a little bit larger. I could do a lot of skin toning and get some stuff off that. And those are all videos for another time. But this series was just a way to take any type of portrait and turn it into kind of an artistic portrait. And there's a whole field for doing this, but these are some of the basics. Anyways, I hope this series, and especially this video, is useful for you, and that you can use some of this in your photography as well. If you did like this video, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. It won't cost anything, and as soon as one of these videos is posted, you'll be the first to know. Thanks a lot for watching. Until next time, take care, be safe, and get out there and shoot something.